Before the Civil War, the United States looked like one country on a map, but maps can lie. Under the surface, the country was splitting over slavery, power, land, money, and the question nobody could escape: who gets to decide what America becomes? People sometimes ask for the one cause of the Civil War, as if history has a single button you can press. But the war did not start because of one angry speech or one election. It started because a long argument kept getting delayed until delay was no longer possible. At the center was slavery. Not as a footnote, not as background decoration. Slavery shaped wealth, politics, law, and daily life in the South. It also forced the whole country to keep asking whether a republic built on liberty could expand while millions of people were held in bondage. The North was becoming more industrial, with factories, railroads, wage labor, and growing cities. The South remained tied to plantation agriculture, especially cotton, and that system depended on enslaved labor. These were not just two economies, they were two visions of power. As the United States expanded west, every new territory raised the same explosive question: would slavery be allowed there or not? A new state was not just land, it meant votes in Congress, it meant influence, it meant the future balance of the country. In 1820, the Missouri Compromise tried to keep the peace by drawing a line across the map. Missouri entered as a slave state, Maine entered as a free state. For a while, the line looked like a solution. Really, it was a bandage over a wound that kept getting deeper. Then the United States won huge western lands after the war with Mexico. That made the old question louder. Would these new places become free or slave? Both sides feared being outnumbered. Both sides believed the other was trying to control the nation's future. The Compromise of 1850 tried again. California entered as a free state. Other territories would decide later. But the same deal included a harsher Fugitive Slave Act, forcing people in free states to help return escaped enslaved people. The conflict was no longer distant. It arrived at people's doors. In Kansas, voters were supposed to decide the slavery question for themselves. That sounded democratic. In practice, pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers rushed in. Elections became contested, and violence followed. Newspapers called it Bleeding Kansas. It was a preview of the country losing control. In 1857, the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision declared that Black people could not be citizens, and that Congress could not ban slavery in the territories. For many in the North, this looked like proof that slavery was not merely staying in the South, it was being protected everywhere. A new political force grew from this crisis: the Republican Party. Its central promise was not immediate abolition everywhere. It was to stop slavery from expanding into Western territories. To many white Southerners, even that sounded like a threat to their whole society. When Abraham Lincoln won the election of 1860 without carrying a single Southern state, many Southern leaders saw the future slipping away. They believed they had lost control of the federal government. They feared slavery would be boxed in, weakened, and eventually destroyed. South Carolina seceded first, in December 1860. Other Deep South states followed. Their declarations were not mysterious. They spoke openly about slavery, political power, and the fear that their system could not survive inside a government now led by people who opposed its expansion. The seceding states formed the Confederacy. Lincoln and the federal government rejected the idea that states could simply leave after losing an election. So, the crisis became two claims at once. The South claimed independence, the Union claimed the country could not be broken apart. Then came Fort Sumter, a federal fort in Charleston Harbor. Confederate forces fired on it in April 1861. The shooting did not create the causes of the war, it lit the fuse. After decades of compromise, fear, and argument, the country finally crossed into open war. People still argue about the Civil War because memory is powerful. Some later stories tried to make the war only about states' rights or tariffs. But states' rights to do what? The central right Southern leaders defended was the right to protect and expand slavery. At first, Lincoln framed the war as a fight to preserve the Union. But wars changed the people inside them. As enslaved people fled to Union lines, as the war expanded, and as the moral reality became impossible to ignore, emancipation moved toward the center of the conflict. So, the honest answer is not tiny. The Civil War began because slavery collided with expansion, democracy, federal power, and competing visions of the nation. Every compromise postponed the decision. Every new territory reopened it. Every election made the future feel more dangerous. The cost was enormous. Families split, towns emptied, soldiers marched into battles they barely understood. Enslaved people watched the war become a door that might open or might close forever. The argument that politicians could not solve became a disaster ordinary people had to survive. The Civil War is not just a story about the past. It is a warning about what happens when a country builds its politics around a contradiction and keeps pretending the contradiction can be managed forever. Some questions do not disappear because people are tired of answering them. So why did the American Civil War really start? Because slavery was not a side issue. It was tied to power, land, law, money, and the future of the United States. The war began when the country could no longer agree on whether that system would grow, survive, or finally be challenged.